Most people spend their entire lives wondering if they're heading in the right direction. You second-guess every decision. You lie awake at night questioning if this is really what you're supposed to be doing. You look at others who seem so certain, so confident, and you wonder what they have that you don't. And here's what makes it worse. Everyone's got an opinion about your life. Your family thinks you should go one direction. Your friends think you should go another. Society keeps telling you what success is supposed to look like. And underneath all that noise, you're trying to figure out what's actually true. The anxiety never stops. Did I make the right choice? Am I wasting my time? Is this path leading somewhere, or am I just walking in circles? Here's what I've learned. Certainty about your path isn't a feeling you conjure up. It's not something you decide to have. It's not about positive thinking or convincing yourself everything's fine when it's not. Certainty is something that's granted to you, and there are specific, unmistakable signs that it's happening. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what to look for. Not vague feelings, not wishful thinking, not self-deception disguised as faith. Actual indicators that your life is aligned with something greater than yourself. Because here's the truth most people miss. The right path isn't just about making good choices or following a moral code or being a decent person. The right path is when your entire being starts to transform in ways you can't fake, can't force, and can't ignore. These aren't signs you manufacture. These aren't things you pretend to experience. When they're real, you know. Other people know. The evidence becomes undeniable. Let me show you what this actually looks like. The first sign. You feel divine support in ways that can't be explained. When you're on the right path, help comes from directions you never expected. Ancient texts describe this as divine support. God standing by those who stand by Him. And it's not subtle. It's not vague. It's not something you have to squint at and convince yourself you're seeing. You pray for something with genuine need, and the answer arrives in a way that makes you pause. You face an obstacle that should break you, and somehow you find strength you didn't know you had. You're walking into a situation that terrifies you, and peace descends on you from nowhere. This isn't coincidence. This isn't positive thinking. This isn't you hyping yourself up. This is what happens when the Creator is with those who are walking toward Him. The ancient texts are absolutely clear about this. God stands by those who are righteous. His support is a sign, a proof that you are moving in alignment with His will. The texts say that those who fear God, those who practice righteousness, receive divine help that's visible and undeniable. And here's what makes this real. You can't manufacture this. You can't psych yourself into experiencing divine intervention. When God's hand is on your life, you know it. Things resolve in ways that logic can't explain. You needed something desperately, and it appeared through channels you never would have predicted. You were stuck in an impossible situation, and the solution presented itself in a way that felt orchestrated beyond your control. Doors open that should be locked. Hearts soften that should be stone. Opportunities appear that had no business appearing. Resources show up right when you needed them, from sources you didn't even know existed. But here's the thing. Most people never experience this because they're not seeking the right thing. They're asking God to bless their plans. They're demanding that the divine conform to their agenda. They want God to make their version of success happen on their timeline. That's not how this works. Ancient wisdom teaches that in any time of difficulty, whether worldly or spiritual, the first thing you must seek is the straight path itself, not the outcome, not the blessing, the path. Just as no illness can be properly treated until the right diagnosis is found, just as no goal can be reached until the proper method is discovered, your life cannot succeed until you find the correct path toward your actual purpose. Everything in existence has a right way of approaching it. Try to achieve something without the proper method, and you'll exhaust yourself making no progress. Find the right path, follow it correctly, and success becomes possible. The texts explain this with profound clarity. When you approach anything from the correct avenue, when you discover the straight path to it, then, with the grace of God, you will achieve your objective. This is an unchangeable law that applies to both worldly and spiritual matters. So the most effective prayer isn't, "Give me this thing I want." The most effective prayer is, "Guide us in the right path. Show me the way that leads to truth. Show me the method that leads to you." Not, "Bless what I'm already doing." Not, "Make my plans work." Guide me to the right path. When you pray that prayer sincerely, when you actually mean it, when you're genuinely asking to be shown the way regardless of whether it matches your current plans, something shifts. Divine support becomes visible, and this support comes in forms you can actually identify. The texts describe different types of divine help that manifest for those on the right path. First, there's help in the form of answered prayers, but not just any prayers being answered. The texts distinguish between prayers that are accepted as a trial, for testing, and prayers that are accepted as exaltation, as a sign of being chosen. When your prayers are answered as exaltation, you're informed of the acceptance. You receive communication. You experience knowledge descending on you. You feel the certainty that this wasn't random chance but divine response. Second, there's help in the form of protection from calamities. When you're on the right path, you're either delivered from disasters in extraordinary ways, or you're granted such steadfastness in facing them that the trial itself becomes sweet. The texts describe this beautifully. They say that when believers are afflicted with great calamities, God treats them in one of two ways. Either He delivers them in an unexpected manner, or He bestows such firmness and inner peace that the difficulty itself becomes a source of spiritual pleasure. That's not normal. That's not human psychology. That's divine support making itself known. Third, there's help in the form of divine communication. When you're genuinely on the right path, knowledge opens to you. Understanding comes from beyond your own reasoning. You receive insights you couldn't have arrived at through your own intellect alone. This isn't vague intuition. The texts describe this as actual converse with God, words that descend upon the heart with certainty, knowledge that flows from the divine source. And here's how you know it is real versus your imagination making stuff up. True divine communication is accompanied by signs. It's verified by external events. It's confirmed by things happening in the world that you had no control over. The texts are specific about this. They say that those who truly receive revelation from God experience hundreds of signs appearing in support of their words. So many signs that reasonable people cannot deny that this is beyond human capacity. You're not just feeling good about something. You're watching reality confirm what was communicated to you. That's how you know the difference between your ego talking and the divine speaking. But all of this depends on one critical thing: righteousness. The texts are absolutely clear. God accepts the prayers of the righteous. God stands by those who fear Him. God's support is granted to those who have made their relationship with Him their priority. If someone is living in opposition to their Creator, if they're indulging in behavior they know is wrong, if they've built barriers between themselves and God through their own choices, those barriers become mountains blocking divine support. The texts say it plainly. When a person displeases God, ruins their relationship with Him, wars against Him through their actions, their own evil deeds become an obstruction that stands in the way of prayer being accepted. So, here's what this means practically. If you're experiencing divine support, help is coming from unexpected directions, prayers are being answered in ways that feel orchestrated, protection and provision keep appearing right when you need them, you're likely on the right path. If you're not experiencing any of this, you need to ask yourself honestly, am I seeking the right path, or am I asking God to bless the path I have already chosen for myself? Because there's a massive difference. One is surrender. The other is negotiation. One opens the door to divine support. The other keeps it firmly closed. The second sign. Peace settles in your heart despite outer chaos. This is where it gets real. This is where most people's assumptions about spiritual life get completely flipped. People think peace means your life gets easy. They think being on the right path means smooth sailing, no problems. Everything works out perfectly. All your difficulties disappear. That's a lie. That's not what the texts promise. That's not what actually happens. What actually happens is this. Your external circumstances might still be difficult. You might still face trials. You might still have problems that need solving. You might still encounter obstacles and setbacks and situations that would normally overwhelm you, but your inner state changes completely. Ancient texts describe this as a calmness that descends upon the heart. They call it tranquility, serenity, peace, and it's one of the clearest signs that you're aligned with something greater. Here's how you know the difference. When you're on the wrong path, everything bothers you. Small setbacks feel catastrophic. Uncertainty eats at you constantly. You have this gnawing anxiety that never fully goes away. You're always on edge, always worried, always feeling like the other shoe is about to drop. Your heart feels like it's burning. The texts actually describe it this way. They say that for those who are disconnected from God, even trivial failures engulf the heart like hellfire. The heart becomes restless, distraught, unable to find comfort. But when you're walking the right path, when you're genuinely connected to divine guidance, something remarkable happens. Misfortunes don't destroy you. Obstacles don't defeat you. The disquietude that's ingrained in human nature begins to disappear. The texts explain this phenomenon with precision. They say that believers continue to receive signs of glad tidings. These aren't warnings or threats, these are communications of peace and reassurance. And as these signs of glad tidings come, calmness descends on the heart. The anxiety that characterizes normal human life starts to fade. A deep sense of being held, being cared for, being watched over by something infinitely more powerful than your circumstances takes root in your being. This isn't numbness. This isn't denial. This isn't you pretending everything's fine when it's not. This is actual peace rooted in certainty. The texts describe the progression clearly. A believer continues to receive signs related to glad tidings throughout their life. Peace and tranquility continue to descend on them. Through this process, they progress in faith and divine knowledge until they reach the stage of absolute certainty. And absolute certainty changes everything. When you know, not hope, not wish, not believe in a shaky way, but genuinely know that you're being held by the Creator of all existence, circumstances lose their power over your inner state. You still feel the difficulty. You're not immune to pain or stress or challenge, but underneath all of it, there's this unshakable foundation of peace. The texts use beautiful language to describe this. They say that when a person reaches this stage of certainty, even misfortunes and calamities become a source of delight and sweetness. Not because the person is masochistic, not because they enjoy suffering, but because they recognize the trial as coming from the hand of the Beloved, and anything from the Beloved carries meaning and purpose. This is what the texts mean when they describe the soul at rest. It's not a soul that has an easy life. It's a soul that's found its home. A soul that's no longer searching frantically because it's arrived. A soul that's at peace with God. And because it's at peace with God, it's at peace with whatever God allows into its life. Here's what this looks like practically. You face a major setback. Something that would normally send you spiraling into anxiety and fear and desperate attempts to control the situation. But instead, you feel this strange calm. You're still taking action. You're still doing what needs to be done. But underneath the action, There's this quiet trust that wasn't there before. You experience loss. Something or someone important to you is taken away. And yes, you feel the grief. Yes, you feel the pain. But underneath the pain, there's this sense of being held. This awareness that you are not alone in the suffering. This trust that there's purpose and wisdom even in what you can't understand. You walk into an uncertain situation. Your rational mind knows there are 1,000 things that could go wrong. But instead of the usual anxiety and worst-case scenario thinking, you find yourself strangely calm. Not because you're confident in yourself, but because you've experienced enough divine support to trust that whatever happens, you'll be given what you need to face it. This peace is supernatural. It makes no logical sense based on circumstances, but it's real. It's tangible. Other people can see it on you. And here's the profound part. This peace doesn't come because your problems are solved. It comes because you've stopped fighting against the divine design of your life. You still work. You still strive. You still do your part completely. The texts are very clear that effort is required. God doesn't accept laziness disguised as trust. You're expected to act, to plan, to use your faculties fully. But you're not consumed by the outcome. You're not white-knuckling your way through life trying to force everything to work out according to your plan. You do what's yours to do. Then you let go of what's not yours to control. The texts describe this as the transition from the self-reproaching self to the soul at rest. It's not a gradual improvement in willpower. It's a fundamental shift in how you relate to God and therefore how you relate to everything else. The self-reproaching self is the state where you want to be good, you try to be good, you feel bad when you fail to be good. But you don't have the power to sustain goodness. You keep falling, you keep stumbling, you keep finding yourself back in the same patterns you hate. But when you transition to the soul at rest, something changes at a deeper level. You're granted strength you didn't have before, power to resist temptation, ability to maintain righteousness, not because you're trying harder, but because you've been given capacity from beyond yourself. And with that capacity comes peace, deep, unshakable, supernatural peace. The texts promise this. They say that signs of peace and tranquility continue to descend on the believer so they may forever progress in faith and divine knowledge and reach the stage of absolute certainty. So, if you're experiencing this kind of peace, if your heart has found a rest it never had before, if circumstances still challenge you but don't consume you the way they used to, you're on the right path. If you're not experiencing this, if anxiety still rules you, if every difficulty sends you into panic and despair, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It means you haven't yet reached this stage of the journey, and that's okay. These are progressive stages, but knowing what you're moving toward helps you recognize when you're actually getting there. The third sign, your character transforms in ways you couldn't force. This is where most people deceive themselves. This is where the difference between religion and spirituality becomes crystal clear. They think being spiritual means performing certain rituals, praying at set times, saying the right words, following the external rules, attending services, checking the boxes. And yes, those things matter. The texts don't dismiss them. But ancient wisdom teaches something more profound. Moral states become spiritual when they're combined with absolute devotion to God, complete purification of the self, cutting away from worldly attachments, turning wholly to God with perfect love, complete devotion, full serenity, and total accord with divine will. That's a lot of conditions. Let's break it down. It's not enough to do good things. You can do good things for bad reasons. You can be kind because you want people to like you. You can be generous because you want to feel superior. You can be religious because you want social acceptance or family approval. That's not spiritual transformation. That's just natural morality, dressed up in religious clothing. True spiritual transformation happens when your character changes at a root level because your relationship with God has changed everything about you. When you're truly on the right path, your character changes automatically. Not because you're trying harder to be good, but because something in you is being transformed at a depth you can't access through willpower alone. The texts describe this as the transition from one state of the soul to another, and they're very specific about what this looks like. They describe three fundamental states of the human soul, three sources from which your actions and character flow. The first source is called the self that incites to evil. This is your natural state before any transformation begins. It's the part of you that is drawn toward whatever feels good in the moment, regardless of whether it's actually good for you. It follows desires without discipline. It seeks pleasure without considering consequences. This isn't evil in the dramatic sense. It's just unregulated human nature. Eating when you're not hungry because food tastes good. Sleeping when you should be working because sleep feels comfortable. Getting angry when you're frustrated because anger feels powerful. Indulging in whatever your body or ego wants in the moment. Everyone starts here. This is the baseline. And the problem is, if you stay here, you never become fully human. You're just a sophisticated animal following instincts. The second source is called the self-reproaching self. This is the moral state that begins when you start to develop conscience and discipline. At this stage, you want to be good. You genuinely desire to exhibit good morals, to control your natural desires, to live by reason rather than instinct. When you fail, you feel genuine shame. You reproach yourself. You wish you were better. But here's the critical thing the texts point out. Even though the self-reproaching self wants to be good and feels bad about being bad, it doesn't have complete power to sustain goodness. It's like a weak child who doesn't want to fall but falls anyway because it lacks strength. You keep trying to be better. You keep failing. You keep resolving to change. You keep ending up in the same patterns. This is where most people get stuck. They're in the moral state, sincerely trying to be good, but they don't have the power to actually become what they're trying to be. And no amount of trying harder works, because you can't willpower your way into transformation. You can modify behaviors temporarily through discipline, but you can't change your nature through effort alone. That requires the third source, the soul at rest. This is the spiritual state, and the texts describe it as something that's granted, not achieved. When you reach this stage, you're filled with spiritual strength. You're given capacity you didn't have before. You develop such a relationship with God that you literally cannot live without Him. The texts use this beautiful metaphor. They say, just as water flows downward and rushes forth because of its sheer volume, removing all obstacles in its way, the soul at rest flows toward God. It's not struggling. It's not forcing. It's being drawn by love so powerful that nothing can stand in its way. And when that happens, your character transforms in ways you couldn't manufacture. Sins that used to grip you suddenly have less power. Not because you're white-knuckling your way through resisting them, but because the appeal is genuinely fading. The pleasure you used to find in certain behaviors starts to feel hollow compared to the satisfaction you find in divine connection. Vices that used to consume you gradually lose their appeal. The texts describe this as the darkness and constraint of the heart being replaced by heavenly light. You start noticing real changes. Anger that used to explode at the slightest provocation becomes something you can actually control. Not suppress control, expressed appropriately, at the right time, in the right measure. Greed that used to drive all your decisions starts to release its grip. You find yourself genuinely content with less, not forcing contentment as a spiritual exercise, but actually feeling satisfied. Envy that used to eat at you when you saw others succeed begins to transform into genuine happiness for them. You're not pretending. You actually feel glad. Pride that used to make you defensive and competitive starts to dissolve. You can admit when you're wrong. You can learn from people you used to consider beneath you. You can receive correction without your ego shattering. This is not willpower. This is transformation. The texts are very specific about how this happens. They say that God inscribes faith on the hearts of believers with His own hand. He makes faith attractive to them and instills its beauty in their hearts. He makes their hearts averse to disbelief and wickedness, impressing upon them repugnance for evil ways. That's not you trying to be good. That's God reshaping you at a level you can't access yourself. And here's how you know it's real versus fake. Real transformation has a direction. You look back 6 months, a year, 2 years, and you're genuinely different. Not perfect. Still flawed, still struggling in some areas, but fundamentally changed in ways that couldn't be explained by self-improvement techniques or behavioral modification. Fake transformation is just performance. You've learned to say the right things and do the right things in public while your private thoughts and hidden behaviors remain unchanged. Real transformation affects your inner life. Your thought patterns change. Your desires shift. What you crave, what you avoid, what you find attractive, what disgusts you, all of this begins to align with what's actually good for your soul. Transformation is just external compliance. You follow the rules because you're supposed to, but your heart's not in it. Real transformation makes you more human, not less. You become kinder without being soft, stronger without being harsh, more disciplined without being rigid. You develop what the texts call right moral qualities, which means every faculty is used at the proper time in the proper measure. Fake transformation makes you weird and unbalanced. You become so spiritual, you're not actually functional in the real world. Or you become so rigid and judgmental that you've lost basic compassion. The texts warn against this. They say that true morality isn't just gentleness or just firmness. It's the wisdom to know when each is appropriate. Compassion when compassion is needed. Strength when strength is needed. When you're truly transforming, people notice. Not because you are trying to impress them, but because something's different. You carry yourself differently. You respond to situations differently. There's a quality about you that wasn't there before. And, most importantly, you notice, not in an arrogant way, but in a humble recognition that you're not who you used to be, and you didn't accomplish this change through your own power. The texts describe this as being enveloped in the flame of divine love until the framework of your ego is consumed and divine qualities begin to manifest through you. You're still you. You're still human. You're still flawed. But you're becoming a demonstration of what happens when a human being allows themselves to be shaped by divine hands. So, if your character is genuinely transforming, if you see real progress over time, if vices are losing their grip and virtues are taking root in ways you couldn't force, you're on the right path. If you're still battling the exact same sins with the exact same lack of progress year after year, if nothing's actually changing except your ability to perform righteousness in public, you're probably still stuck in the self-reproaching stage. And that's not a condemnation. It's an invitation to go deeper, to stop trying to transform yourself and start asking to be transformed. The fourth sign, you receive knowledge and insights that weren't there before. When you're walking the right path, understanding comes to you. Not because you got smarter, not because you studied harder, but because doors of knowledge are being opened that were previously locked. Ancient texts describe this as receiving light from the unseen. They say that those who truly seek God are granted full comprehension, not through their own effort alone, but through divine bestowal. Let me explain how this actually works because it's one of the most misunderstood aspects of spiritual life. Most people think knowledge comes only through study. You read books, you learn information, you accumulate facts, you develop expertise, and yes, that's one type of knowledge. The texts don't dismiss it, but there's another type of knowledge entirely, a knowing that comes from beyond the reasoning mind, a certainty that's granted, not earned. The texts explain this with profound clarity. They say that reason alone can only establish the need for something. It can prove that something should be, but it cannot confirm that it is. Think about that distinction. Your reason can tell you that God should exist based on the design of the universe, but reason alone cannot give you certainty that God actually exists and is personally involved in your life. Your reason can tell you that living righteously should bring peace, but reason alone cannot give you the experience of that peace. Your reason can tell you that prayer should work, but reason alone cannot give you the confirmation that your specific prayer was heard and answered. For all of that, reason needs a companion, and that companion is revelation, divine communication, light descending from the unseen into the heart of the seeker. The texts are very specific about how this happens. They describe different levels of certainty, different stages of knowing. The first stage is faith. This is when you accept truth based on reliable factors without waiting for perfect proof. You see enough evidence to warrant trust, so you take the step of commitment even though you don't have absolute certainty yet. This is where everyone starts. You can't skip this stage. You have to be willing to act on trust before you're given full knowledge. The second stage is certainty through knowledge. This is when clear reasons and definitive arguments become available to you. What you accepted on faith begins to be confirmed through understanding. Things start making sense that didn't make sense before. You read passages you've read 100 times, and suddenly they mean something completely different. Profound truths that were hidden from you become obvious. Connections you never saw before become clear. This isn't you getting smarter. This is doors of understanding opening. The third stage is certainty by sight. This is when God, out of His special bounty, opens the doors of visions and revelation. You begin to experience things that can't be explained by reason or study alone. You receive communication. You have dreams that turn out to be true. You experience guidance that comes from beyond your own thinking. You witness things that prove to you, personally and undeniably, that you're being led. The texts describe this as God acquainting a person with His favors and bounties, bestowing knowledge from Himself, revealing the wonders of divinity. And the fourth stage is certainty by realization. This is the highest level. This is when your whole being is saturated with divine love to such a degree that even misfortunes become sweet, because they come from the hand of the Beloved. At this stage, you're not just intellectually convinced of truth, you're living in direct experience of it. The texts describe this as being wholly consumed by the fire of divine love, so that nothing remains of your ego, and you become a demonstration of divine manifestation. Now, here's what all this means practically. When you're on the right path, you progress through these stages, not all at once, not linearly, but there's movement. Things that confused you start making sense. Questions you struggled with find answers, sometimes in unexpected ways. Understanding dawns on you that you didn't study for or work to achieve. You're reading something, and suddenly a truth hits you with such force and clarity that you know it's not just your intellect processing information, it's revelation breaking through. You're facing a problem, and the solution comes to you in a way that feels like it was placed in your mind rather than generated by your thinking. You're confused about a direction to take, and clarity descends on you with such certainty that you know this knowing didn't come from you. The texts explain that when God inscribes faith on someone's heart with His own hand and helps them with the Holy Spirit, they begin to receive knowledge that others don't receive. Doors of the unseen open to them that remain closed to others. This isn't about being special or superior. It's about being connected to the source of all knowledge. And here's how you verify this is real and not just your imagination. First, true divine knowledge aligns with divine teaching. The texts are clear about this. If you're receiving what you think is revelation, and it contradicts established spiritual truth, it's not from God, it's from your ego, or worse. Second, true divine knowledge is accompanied by transformation. If you're supposedly receiving all this spiritual insight, but your character isn't changing and your life isn't bearing fruit, something's wrong. Third, true divine knowledge is verified by signs. The texts say that those who receive communication from God are shown hundreds of signs confirming the truth of what they receive. Reality confirms what was communicated. You receive knowledge about something that's going to happen, and it happens. You're guided to take a specific action, and it leads to outcomes you couldn't have predicted. You're given understanding about someone's situation, and later you find out you were exactly right. This isn't psychic ability. This isn't you being clever. This is divine knowledge being granted because you're walking in alignment with the source. But here's the critical thing the texts emphasize. This type of knowing requires purity. You can't be living in deliberate sin, ignoring your conscience, following your lower desires, and expect to receive divine knowledge. The texts say only those whose souls have been completely purified, who have withdrawn from their passions, who have submitted to a spiritual death that brings them close to God and far from corruption, only these people begin to hear divine communication clearly. A person hears the voice they're close to. If you're close to your ego and your base desires, you hear their voice and mistake it for divine guidance. If you're close to God through purification and devotion, you hear His voice. So, if you're experiencing real growth in understanding, if knowledge is opening to you that wasn't there before, if you're receiving insights and guidance that prove themselves true through actual events, you're on the right path. If you've been spiritually stagnant for years with no new understanding, no fresh revelation, no growth in certainty, something needs to change. Either you're not seeking deeply enough, or you're not pure enough for the knowledge to be granted, or you're seeking knowledge for the wrong reasons. The texts say that divine knowledge is given to those who seek God Himself, not to those who seek knowledge for its own sake, or for status, or to impress others. Seek God, purify yourself, open your heart in genuine humility, and knowledge will come. Not all at once, not on your timeline, but it will come, because God does not leave sincere seekers in darkness. The fifth sign. Your whole life starts organizing itself around one purpose. This is the ultimate indicator. This is the sign that everything is coming together. This is where you know, not hope, not wish, but genuinely know that you're aligned with your reason for existing. When you're truly on the right path, everything else begins to fall into place around your central purpose. Not because your life becomes simple, not because all your problems disappear, not because everything goes according to your plans, but because you gain clarity about what actually matters. The texts describe this as the soul reaching its appointed purpose, and that purpose, according to ancient wisdom, isn't wealth or success or happiness or comfort or achievement. The texts are absolutely clear. Humans were created for one reason: to know the Creator and to worship Him. That's it. That's the purpose. Everything else is secondary. When you're walking toward that purpose, when that becomes your actual priority, and not just something you say, your entire life reorients itself. Work becomes a means of serving something greater, not just paying bills or building a career. You still work, you still excel, but the motivation changes. You're working to support your ability to fulfill your real purpose. Relationships become opportunities for showing divine qualities: compassion, justice, mercy, patience, forgiveness, not just meeting your emotional needs or avoiding loneliness. Trials become preparation for deeper connection with God, not random punishments or cosmic unfairness. You start recognizing that difficulties are shaping you for something beyond yourself. Time becomes sacred. You stop wasting hours on things that don't serve your purpose, not in a rigid, joyless way, but in a way where you naturally lose an interest in emptiness and find yourself drawn toward what's meaningful. Money becomes a tool, not a goal. You stop chasing wealth for its own sake and start seeing resources as something to be used wisely in service of your real purpose. Even your thoughts change. The texts describe this as having God become your treasure, what you think about in your private moments, what captures your attention, what you daydream about. When God is truly your treasure, your thoughts naturally turn toward Him, not as a forced spiritual exercise, but as the natural flow of a heart that's found its home. The texts say it this way: when a person's heart becomes worthy to be the dwelling place of God, the kingdom of corruption must be uprooted. You can't serve two masters. You can't have God as your stated priority, while actually organizing your life around wealth, status, pleasure, or approval. When you're on the wrong path, you're scattered, pulled in 1,000 directions, trying to satisfy 100 different desires that never get filled, chasing after things that promise satisfaction but deliver emptiness. Your goals contradict each other. You want financial success and you want spiritual depth, but the path to one undermines the other. You want worldly recognition and you want humility, but you can't pursue both with equal intensity. You're constantly torn, constantly conflicted, constantly feeling like no matter what you choose, you're betraying something else you value. When you're on the right path, you're unified. Everything you do flows from one source and returns to one purpose. This doesn't mean you abandon everything else. You still have responsibilities. You still care for your family. You still pursue goals. You still engage with the world. But all of it serves the master purpose. All of it becomes a way of knowing God more deeply and serving His will more completely. Your career becomes a way to support your spiritual life and serve others. Your relationships become a way to manifest divine qualities and help souls on their journey. Your struggles become a way to develop the character God is forming in you. And here's what nobody tells you about this. It's actually liberating. Most people think submission to God means restriction. They think it means giving up freedom and choice and desire. They think it means becoming some rigid, joyless robot following rules. But the opposite is true. When you align your will with divine will, you stop fighting against yourself. You stop exhausting yourself, chasing things that were never meant to satisfy you. You stop being torn in 1,000 directions by competing desires. You find the one thing that actually fills the void. And once you have that, everything else finds its proper place. The texts describe this state as the soul at rest, a soul that's found its home, a soul that's no longer searching frantically because it's arrived, not because life is easy, not because all questions are answered, not because there are no more challenges, but because the soul knows its purpose and is living in alignment with it. And that alignment brings a peace that circumstances can't disturb. Here's how you know if this is happening in your life. You stop being obsessed with outcomes. You still care about results, but you're not consumed by them. You do your part completely, then you let go. You stop comparing yourself to others, not because you've convinced yourself comparison is bad, but because you're running a different race. Your purpose is unique. Their path is not yours. You stop needing approval, not because you don't value relationships, but because you've found your identity in something that can't be taken from you. You start making decisions differently. Instead of asking, "What will make me happy?" or "What will impress people?" you find yourself asking, "What aligns with my purpose?" And that question simplifies everything. Opportunities that used to tempt you lose their appeal because you can see they don't serve where you're going. Achievements that used to obsess you become less important because you've found something better to care about. The text described this as loving the Creator more than creation. When that love becomes real, not theoretical, everything else falls into its proper place. You don't stop caring about created things, but you stop making them ultimate. You stop expecting them to do for you what only the Creator can do. And in that reordering, in that reorganizing of your life around one central purpose, you find the freedom and satisfaction you were seeking all along. So, if your life is starting to unify itself around knowing and serving God, if that's becoming the lens through which you see everything else, if your choices and priorities and desires are all flowing in the same direction, you're on the right path. If you're still scattered, still pulled in 1,000 directions, still trying to serve competing masters, still feeling fragmented and conflicted, you haven't reached this stage yet, and that's okay. This is the culmination, not the beginning. But knowing where you're going helps you recognize when you're actually getting there. Here's what this all means: the integration. Let me bring this all together because these 5 signs aren't separate. They're interconnected. They build on each other. They confirm each other. When you're on the right path, divine support becomes visible in your life. Help comes from unexpected directions. Prayers are answered in ways that feel orchestrated. Protection and provision appear right when needed. And that divine support brings peace, not because your problems disappear, but because you know you're being held by something bigger than your circumstances. Calmness descends on your heart. The anxiety that used to rule you begins to release its grip. And as you experience peace, transformation begins. Your character changes in ways you couldn't force through willpower alone. Vices lose their power. Virtues take root. The direction of your life shifts toward purity. And as transformation happens, knowledge opens. Understanding comes to you from beyond your own reasoning. Doors of insight that were locked begin to open. You receive guidance that proves itself true. And all of this, the support, the peace, the transformation, the knowledge, leads to the ultimate reordering. Your whole life organizing itself around one purpose. Everything finding its proper place in service of knowing and worshiping your Creator. These aren't 5 separate experiences. They're 5 aspects of one reality, the reality of walking in alignment with divine will. You can't fake this. You can't manufacture these signs through positive thinking or spiritual techniques or religious performance. When they're real, you know. Other people know. The evidence is undeniable. But here's the part most people miss. These signs don't all appear at once, and they don't appear because you're perfect. They appear because you're sincerely seeking, because you've made your relationship with God your priority, because you're willing to walk wherever the path leads, even when it's not the path you would have chosen. The texts promise this: those who truly seek God, those who search for the straight path with sincerity, will find avenues opened to them, not because they deserve it, not because they earned it, but because God does not let sincere effort go in vain. If you're experiencing these signs, if divine support is visible, peace is settling in your heart, if your character is genuinely transforming, if understanding is opening, if your life is organizing around one purpose, trust it. Keep walking. You're on the right path. If you're not experiencing these signs, you need to ask yourself an honest question. Am I actually seeking the right path, or am I asking God to bless the path I have already chosen? Because there's a massive difference between those two things. Asking God to bless your path means you've decided what you want and you're trying to get divine approval for it. You've made your plans, you've set your goals, and now you want God to make them successful. That's not surrender, that's negotiation. Seeking the right path means you're genuinely willing to go wherever God leads, even if it contradicts everything you thought you wanted. You're asking to be shown the way, not asking for your way to be blessed. That's surrender, and that's what opens the door to divine guidance, the ancient wisdom that changes everything. Here's the ancient wisdom that changes everything. In worldly or spiritual difficulty, the first thing you must seek is the straight path that leads to your objective, not the outcome, not the blessing, not the success, the path itself. When you pray, guide us in the right path with genuine sincerity, when you actually mean it, when you're willing to walk whatever road is shown to you even if it's not the road you wanted, that's when everything shifts. That's when divine support becomes visible. That's when peace descends on your heart. That's when transformation begins. That's when knowledge opens. That's when your life finds its purpose. You don't find the right path by trying harder to be good. You don't find it by following more rules, or performing more rituals, or checking more spiritual boxes. You find it by genuinely seeking it, by asking for it, by being willing to walk it wherever it leads. The texts promise this: those who sincerely seek will find avenues opened to them, not because they deserve it, but because God does not let the sincere effort go in vain. He will grant them the light they seek. So here's what I want you to do. Stop obsessing over whether every decision is perfect. Stop trying to engineer certainty through your own understanding. Stop looking for guarantees before you take the next step. Instead, pray for the path itself. Ask to be shown the right way. Mean it. Be willing to go where it leads. Then watch for these signs: divine support in your life, help coming from unexpected directions, prayers answered in ways that feel orchestrated, peace in your heart, calmness settling where there used to be anxiety, trust growing where there used to be fear, transformation in your character, real change that you didn't force, vices losing their grip, virtues taking root, knowledge opening to you, understanding dawning, doors of insight that were locked beginning to open, purpose unifying everything, your life organizing itself around what actually matters, clarity about why you're here and what you're meant to do. These signs won't all come at once. They might come gradually. They might come in unexpected ways. But if you're sincerely seeking, they will come. And when they do, you'll know. Not because someone told you, not because you convinced yourself, but because the evidence will be undeniable. That's not wishful thinking. That's not self-deception. That's the ancient promise fulfilled in your life. You're on the right path when you can see it happening, when the signs are visible, when the transformation is real, when your whole being confirms what you're seeking has found. The path exists. The signs are real. The transformation is possible. Start seeking. Keep seeking. Don't stop until you find it, because the promise is true. Those who seek with sincerity will be guided to the straight path, and when you find it, everything changes.